Number 4.
Legends of Tomorrow. Well, we've entered the top 5 shows of the season with Legends of Tomorrow, and in all honesty, I almost put this show at the bottom of the list at the mid-season. They got off to a very rocky start, but I think they really turned it around with a very strong second half. Before I get to the pluses and negatives, a quick recap of the plot. Rip Hunter goes against the wishes of the Time Masters, a group whose sole function is to see that time unfolds as it should, to track down and destroy one Vandal Savage, an immortal tyrant who has lived for millennia and has conquered the world in Rip's era 2166, killing Rip's wife and child in the process. To help him accomplish this, Rip rounds up a crew of heroes and villains from 2016 to complement his time travel ship, the Wave Rider, and travel to time periods where they might catch Savage unawares. The Wave Rider has an AI called Gideon, which may or may not be the same future tech created by Barry Allen. The crew consists of Ray Palmer, the Atom, the shrinking hero who was presumed dead after Season 3 of Arrow; Firestorm, now comprised of Dr. Martin Stein and his new partner Jefferson Jackson; Sarah Lance, who was dubbed the White Canary by her sister Laurel in the pilot; Hawkman and Hawkgirl, who dealt with Savage in the Big Flash Arrow crossover; and the two rogues, Captain Cold and Heatwave. Rip promises if they work together, they will become legends, but eventually admits that the reason he picked them is that they are essentially the B-team, and their deaths would have minimal impact on the unfolding of history. The team is pursued by Kronos, a bounty hunter working for the Time Masters, hired to bring them in. After a strong initial opening, the series gets a bit bumpy by killing off Hawkman, who is no small character in DC lore, fairly early on. This leaves Hawkgirl to mope about his loss and engage in an ill-conceived triangle between her, Ray, and Hawkman's memory. The biggest problem seems to be for the Legends in the making that they come off more like the gang who couldn't shoot straight, causing more problems in the timeline than they solve. For a Time Master, Rip seems to have pretty poor foresight. Obviously, part of a team concept is watching their growing pains, as it were, and seeing them learn to trust and work with each other. Savage, when last seen, was incinerated, and they don't really give an explanation as to how he returned beyond Malcolm saving some of his remains at the end of the crossover. Eventually it's revealed that only Hawkgirl can kill Savage, and only by using a weapon forged by certain elements from her past, which makes it a very narrow hoop for them to jump through, as they frustratingly try to kill Savage again and again over the span of history. One of the more glaring issues the series has, particularly early on, is that it comes off more like a time-traveling Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where the group is more prone to working undercover to pull off some kind of covert mission than to suit up in their costumes and cut loose with their powers on the bad guys. Oftentimes, obvious contrivances are made to take Stein or Jax off the table as to spare the CGI budget for an episode. Ditto Ray's Atom suit. One would think a shrinking man would be of invaluable help, but they tend to marginalize Atom, having whole episodes without having him shrink or even appear in costume. This is one point that really needs to be addressed going forward. The main highlight of the early season is an episode that takes place in Star City 2046, in which the son of Deathstroke, Grant Wilson, takes over, having killed all who have opposed him. The new Green Arrow is Connor Hawke, who in this possible future is the son of John Diggle. These types of stories are always fun, and it gives Sarah a chance for the spotlight. Stephen Amell makes a fantastic appearance as an old, one-armed Oliver Queen, who eventually gets pressed back into service to fight the new Deathstroke. Amell's performance is exceptional, and his age makeup is pretty convincing. His beard kind of recalls the classic goateed look of Green Arrow. The downside is a not too well fleshed out Grant Wilson, since in typical CW fashion, they spend the B-plot on a Jax, Ray, and Kendra triangle, rather than beef up the villain's part. Mick Rory, aka Heatwave, really steals the show here. He's hilarious. He and Cold make the perfect team. But where Cold eventually comes around to the concept of serving the greater good, Mick doesn't have the slightest altruistic bone in his body. It's genuinely heartbreaking to see them growing apart over the course of the season, culminating in Mick betraying the team to space pirates, only to have Cold have to take him out, Old Yeller style. After a very heavy-handed excursion into 1958, the series finally hits its stride. Kronos captures the Wave Rider, stranding Ray, Kendra, and Sarah in 1958. When the crew returns to retrieve them 2 years into the future, Sarah has returned to the League of Assassins under the influence of Ra's al Ghul. When we last saw Sarah on Arrow, she left town fighting the urges of her bloodlust to kill and battle. That recurs early on in the season, but in a throwaway line, Ra's says that meditation and herbs have cured Sarah of her bloodlust. They could have just named the same lotus potion that cured Thea over in Arrow, but chose to be more vague here. While the team tries to reach Sarah, Kronos captures Snart and reveals himself to be Mick, whom Snart did not kill. Mick was found by the Time Masters and programmed to hunt the crew of the Wave Rider. In the exciting conclusion, Kendra battles Sarah, forcing her to regain her memory, and the team takes on Kronos in Ra's domain. They capture him and pledge to reform him. Next up, the team take a trip to the future for an exploration of that age-old quandary. Would you kill Hitler as a child, knowing full well what he'd become, yet while he was still innocent of any crime? The target in question is Perdegaton, a 12-year-old or so who is being tutored by Savage to one day conquer the world, only to be assassinated by Savage in the end. It's handled pretty thoughtfully, as Rip is torn between potentially saving his family by murdering the child. He concludes, however, that his inability to do it is a sign not of weakness, but of goodness. The team then find themselves in the Wild West being chased by the Time Masters' mercenaries. They run into one of Rip's old acquaintances, DC's perennial Old West favorite, Jonah Hex. It's a fun little tale that sees Ray play sheriff, while Kendra meets an older version of herself in a past life, and Dr. Stein saves the life of a young H.G. Wells. Another interesting concept has another of the Time Masters' operatives, the Pilgrim, going back in time to kill the team's younger selves. The crew manages to head her off, snatching up young and in most cases infant versions of themselves, and hiding them with Rip's adopted mum, who is also keeping his perpetually young self under her watchful eye. It's a fun episode that has its poignant moments as Jax wrestles with whether he should risk creating a potential time paradox by warning his dad of his impending death in the military. The Pilgrim also gets an enjoyable comeuppance. At this point, I should point out the series' rules for time travel. It seems admittedly complicated at first blush, but it pretty much boils down to you can't do a time travel do-over in this universe, a la Back to the Future 2. You get one bite at the apple, and if you fail, you can't try again for fear of the dreaded time paradox. For example, Rip goes back in time to Egypt at one point to kill Savage before he gets his immortal power. But he hesitates in killing him, missing his only opportunity to do so in that time. He can't just go back and try again. The nature of time travel is complex to begin with, but they do the best they can with the concept here. As the season nears its end, the team decides to head Vandal off in the future, in 2166, mere days before he is to kill Rip's family. Savage rules the globe with his daughter at his side. Eventually, Snart brings her around to their side, and they gain the invaluable weapon of a bracelet that Kendra melts down to coat her mace, allowing her to kill Savage. The CGI, it should be noted, is exceptionally good given the limitations of television. The best example is during the battle between Savage's giant robot, the Leviathan, and the Atom, who now has the power to grow as well as shrink. In a pretty decent twist, Kendra fails to kill Savage after she finds that Savage has the 2116 reincarnation of Carter as his brainwashed lackey. Rip brings both Carter and Savage prisoner on the Wave Rider. Rip intends to deliver Savage to the Time Masters with proof that Savage has tampered with the timeline. Evidently, being immortal isn't a crime, but affecting the timeline through time jumps is. But it's revealed that the Time Masters were actually in league with Savage all along. They're backing his takeover of the world, as they see it as humanity's only chance for survival against an imminent attack by Thanagar. To make matters worse, they had Rip's family killed in order to use Rip to orchestrate the timeline to their satisfaction. So when the entire first half of the season paints Rip and the crew as highly ineffective, it turns out it was all by design by the Time Masters. I thought this was handled quite cleverly overall, and it pretty much won me over for this season. As Savage escapes with Kendra and the brainwashed Carter, the team attacks the Time Masters' base, destroying the Oculus, the device that allows them to see the future. Captain Cold knocks out Heatwave and gives his life to blow up the Oculus. I'm not sure how Sarah was expected to carry Mick back to the Wave Rider. He's a pretty big boy. Sarah and Snart are given the hint of a possible relationship here. I actually liked Rip and Sarah's chemistry better, but obviously with Rip's mission being to save his wife and son, it was hardly the time for such a romance. I frankly always hated that they tried to make Sarah a full-out lesbian. She was originally going to be a thing with Oliver, but post that breakup, they really haven't played up that she likes guys too, beyond the brief flirtation with Snart. It's nice that CW didn't spare the expense to get several of their series co-stars to make an appearance in the season, including Green Arrow, Damien Dark, Ra's al Ghul, Nyssa, Cisco, Quentin, and Laurel. Ultimately, Rip fails to save his family from being murdered by Savage despite his innumerable tries. As we are told repeatedly, sometimes time wants to happen. In the same way, when Sarah eventually learns that Dark killed Laurel and asks to be taken back to prevent it, Rip tells her that if she were present, both she, Laurel, and Quentin would die. It's kind of a shaky excuse that boils down to, we can't save everyone because reasons. I think the show had the best finale of all the CW shows this season. The crew needs to travel to 3 separate time periods to where Vandal attempts to mix Carter's blood with a meteor. The results would allow Savage to have dominion over Earth for all time. While in close proximity to the meteor, Savage loses his immortal power and can be killed. The team splits up and of course ends up succeeding in killing him in all 3 time zones. It's certainly a much more thrilling finish when you consider all we were promised is that they'd have to hold Savage down so that Hawkgirl could stab him with his super special knife. Carter regains his memory and the two go off in search of their own adventures. I think they were the weakest link in the show. I definitely would like to see them again, but they work better as recurring characters than getting the focus for a whole nother season. Rip reunites the rest of the crew to take the place of the now defunct Time Masters, and the season cliffhanger introduces the team to Our Man, who warns them not to board the Wave Rider per future Mix orders. They don't address Laurel or Snart's return, so their fates are pretty much left subject to if the show writers can conceive a logical return for them. So yeah, in the end I think the series really pulled it together. They laid a solid groundwork this season, they have a really good cast with a fun premise, and I'm certainly looking forward to the future. I'm giving Legends of Tomorrow Season 1 4 stars out of 5. This is Johnnie Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.